There's a lot more to experience than thinking, and not all experience takes place through thinking. Thinking is just one type of experience. But you have times when you are not thinking, and therefore thinking cannot be essential to you. If thinking were essential to you, then when a thought disappeared, you would disappear. But that's not true. If the thought disappears, you remain. There's a brief pause, and then the next thought appears. In that brief pause, you continue to exist. You still are, but there is no thought. So not only does all experience not take place through thinking, but thinking is not essential to you. It's like the subtitles on a movie. They're not essential to the movie. The movie is the perceptions, the subtitles are the thoughts. There are gaps between the subtitles. There are gaps between our thoughts when we continue to exist, but the thoughts don't.
I can sort of see what you're saying. I guess I'm leaning towards the suffering, that I experienced for many years, that it was created via thought. It's like I created a story of who I thought I was in my own mind on a daily basis.
That's true.
And then I escaped from who I thought I was with substances and processes and psychiatric medication and all the other stuff, the crazy stuff that I did.
Yes, because all those activities and substances took you away from they distracted you from your suffering. They didn't uproot your suffering. They didn't attend to its cause, but they did distract you from it, more or less successfully. And then when the drink wore off, the suffering bubbles up again, you have another drink, the suffering subsides again. And therefore you got the message, as long as I keep drinking, I don't feel my suffering. Doesn't mean it's gone away, you just don't feel it anymore. And that, as you know, it works well, but in the end, it falls apart. Yeah. Sooner or later, you have to turn around and face this awful sense of lack that you've been fleeing from all your life into, in your case, substances, activities, relationships, and so on. But it's good. It sounds that you've done that. Or you are doing that.
So, can you just say a little bit more about recognition? Like, does recognition of true nature not come inherently with joy and peace? And is that not an experience? You said it's a recognition and not an experience?
Yes, no. Peace and in the way I use the terms peace and joy are not really feelings in the same way that sorrow, lack, envy, fear, shame are feelings. They are the background of all feeling. It's like the analogy that I like to use sometimes is the analogy of the blue sky and the clouds. So imagine a grey, a completely grey sky, a sky covered in grey clouds. This would be the condition of someone who was perpetually depressed, or at least low, sad, heavy. And then at a certain stage, a gap in the clouds open up and a little patch of blue appears. Now you might, to begin with, think that the grey sky is the natural condition of the sky, and the blue is an appearance of a blue cloud in the grey sky. That would be equivalent to a moment of happiness in someone who is chronically depressed. A momentary fleeting experience of happiness, and then back to my depression. That's how it would appear, and you might reasonably conclude from that happiness is a fleeting experience. Just like this patch of blue in the sky, the clouds close over again, the blue sky disappears, and you say, there you are, that was a blue cloud that briefly appeared and then vanished. That's how it seems to be for one whose natural condition is one of depression or sorrow or suffering. And then after a while, more and more blue patches open up in the sky. To begin with, you think, oh, there are lots of blue patches, that there are an equal number of blue clouds and grey clouds. That's the state of one who thinks that happiness and suffering are both two equal and opposite feelings that alternate with one another. Happiness is a feeling, and suffering is a feeling, and they just alternate with one another. They're two feelings, and they just alternate, like the blue sky and the grey sky. And then, as more and more clouds dissipate, you begin to realize, oh no, the blue sky, they weren't intermittent clouds in the sky. It's the ever-present background of the sky that's present everywhere in the sky, behind all the clouds. But that's the experience of happiness. It appears to begin with to be a feeling like all other feelings that alternate with our other afflictive emotions. But it's not. It is the background. It's the nature of the background. But so in other words, peace and happiness, I would not consider them feelings. We think of them as feelings because they alternate with the feelings of depression, sorrow, sadness, grief, fear, envy, and so on. So we think that happiness is just a blue cloud in the grey sky. No, it's not. Happiness is our true nature. It's the background. So in other words, there is never the absence of happiness. Just like there is never the absence of the blue sky. The blue sky is always there. It's either visible or veiled, but never absent. Happiness is the same. There is either happiness or the veiling of happiness, but never the absence of happiness. So happiness is not a feeling that comes and goes. It's the nature of our being that can be obscured and then revealed. It can be concealed and revealed. But it is never absent.
Yeah, that fits with my experience. I think different words, maybe semantics of what I've heard before, but it makes sense. I can see it that way.
In fact, even referring to it as happiness, it can sometimes be a little misleading, because when we think of happiness, we think of it as an emotion, a temporary emotion. The only reason we call it happiness is by contrast with our previous suffering. If you live in California, you don't continually comment on the blue sky, because the blue sky is there all the time. You comment when there is an occasional cloud. In England, where it's normally cloudy, we don't comment on the clouds because it's always cloudy. We comment when there's a nice patch of blue. Oh, look, there's a blue sky. So once we begin to be established in our true nature and we begin to feel its innate peace, and the suffering begins to leave us, we no longer describe our current experience with reference to our previous suffering, because it has left. We don't give it a name. We don't go around thinking, or let alone saying, oh, I'm so happy. It's just your natural condition. It's just this natural condition of absence of suffering, or ease, or peace. So sometimes happiness is too positive a word for it, and makes us think that some marvelous experience is being referred to. That's why I quite like the it's got its downside as well when the Buddhists speak just of the absence of suffering. It's a little bit too neutral for me, but I think there's a lot of intelligence in referring to it as the absence of suffering. But it is something more positive than that. Like I said, our true nature is not just nothing. It's not just a blank. It is.
So can I presume that if I'm not experiencing happiness, that I'm perhaps unknowingly veiling my true nature if it's not obvious that I'm doing that.
Yes, if you're suffering, I don't mean physically in pain, I mean emotionally suffering, at that moment you have mistaken yourself for a temporary, finite self. You have allowed yourself to become so mixed with the content of your experience that you believe, I am this collection of thinking, feeling, sensing and perceiving. So you have at that moment forgotten or overlooked who you truly are. Yes. Suffering is the signal, the intelligence, just like pain is an intelligent signal to the body saying, you need to attend to the body, take your hand out of the fire. It's an unpleasant but intelligent signal from the body, letting us know that the body requires attention. Suffering is exactly the same signal at the level of the mind. It is an intelligent signal from the mind saying, you have mistaken yourself for a cluster of thoughts, feelings, sensations, perceptions. Go back to who you truly are. It's like an alarm bell that reminds us. It's an intelligence of the system that reminds us that we have overlooked or forgotten who we truly are. Instead of trying to fulfill the suffering or avoid it through objects, substances, etc., we should take it as a signal to go back to ourself, which is the source of peace.
So one last thing then. Like Tim asked about getting to that place of, I can't remember the words you used, perhaps sustained enlightenment, or whatever the right wording was, where you was resting in your true nature most all of the time. I can't remember the exact words that were used. You know, is it just normal to have experiences of falling in and out of that? You know, like getting lost in the human experience, then realizing who we are.
Yes, absolutely. There's a back and forth. It's completely natural that there is this back and forth. But as I said earlier, in time, fewer and fewer experiences have the capacity to take us away. So we tend to remain knowingly ourselves for longer and longer periods of time. And every time we do so, we weaken the capacity that objective experience has to veil our true nature and its innate peace.
Thank you.